So this time from the Masters of the Universe Classics, we're going to be taking a look at Fisto, one of the figures that was offered at MediCollector.com in February of 2012. First, we're going to be taking a look at the back of the package here. You can see other figures from all different points in the line, old figures, newer figures. You got the backstory with some nice vintage card art in the little shield there. A nice bio, which is pretty much the 2002 origin. I mean, it's early. He's in the early running as one of the best figures for me for 2012, of which, well, I've only gotten 3, so time will tell who will take the best figure in the line for 2012, but he is an early runner. Strange enough, I never had him as a kid. You know, I always liked him. I had his arch enemy, Jitsu, which always amused me, is that I had his horse. I think it's called Stridor, the mechanical horse, or biomechanical horse, but I never had him. So, very glad to have the opportunity to get him in the Classics line. Some great detail on here. The nice, great sculpt on the beard and the face and the hair. Just the whole head is excellent. You got details on the all the weapons are nice, and we'll take a look at those in a moment. Very nicely painted. I think the only real difference is that there is a slight difference in paint between this bicep and the other parts of his flesh colors, and it's barely perceptible, I think. Some people think it's a lot bigger. I think that's mainly because the underside didn't get painted as well as the upper side. And a lot of people are posing him in, you know, wind-up punches so that you can really tell it's really apparent because of the sculpt of this bicep. Because if you notice, it is just a bit bigger than the other bicep. You can particularly tell from the back here. You can see the normal bicep and how much bigger and more muscular this bicep is. And that's because he's lugging around this giant fist, in case you hadn't noticed. So, of course, his arm is going to be a little bit stronger and more developed. And you can see that there's veins popping on there more than on the other side. And the reason why it's discolored here, or, you know, there's a slightly different color, is probably because they had to sculpt this from scratch, so they couldn't use an already sculpted color plastic. They had to use a new plastic, and so it must, you know, it's out of place with the reused plastic of the shoulders and lower arms. Like I said before, I like the details they've put into his accessories. And he comes with several accessories as well as an additional head. And we'll take a look at those right now. First, we'll do his vintage sword, which is a repaint, just like the vintage character had a repainted Triclops sword. So does he, and it's got this nice metallic-y purple on the blade here. You got nice details that match his costume with the bronzish and silver color on the design here. Unfortunately, there's no place to sheathe the sword on his person, the figure's person. They've opted to go instead for someplace to sheathe the 2002 design of the sword, which is pretty freaking huge. And don't get me wrong, it's cool, very Final Fantasy like, and I do like the fist detail on it. You can even see details of the wrapping on the hilt there. And again, you do get these, I don't know what you would call them, these bumps here that connect to his armor that he wears. And I'm told that the 2000X figure didn't come with this sword for some reason. So if you have that figure, I would think that it's great to get this, and so you could put it with that figure. Unfortunately, they've decided to give him this big, huge thing on the back for the sword to fit into. And this leads me to one of my pet peeves about action figures. And I really cannot stand when action figures have holsters or sheaths, or even if they're loops for something that are designed for the character, like as if you were in real life, to draw or use the sword from a specific hand. Because if you notice, it's meant for this hand to draw the sword out so that when he draws it, it will face forward. And thus it's angled like that on the back there. Now, of course, the fist doesn't open, so he can't wield the sword in this hand. So, it really annoys me that this is his only hand, and he really can't, he's really not meant to wield the sword or to draw the sword in this hand. And that really annoys me. They could have done something to this thing where you could have this replaced with something or another piece on here, so that you wouldn't have this big huge gap back there if you didn't want the big honking sword there. But I noticed that he's detailed with a lot of these highly decorated M's. You notice there's two here. I want to briefly go over his belt here, which is based on the 2002 design. I really like it, so much so that I put it on the figure here, and I'm probably going to keep it on there. But you can take it off and go back to more of the vintage look for the figure. But the belt has this nice ram's head design with these bronze highlights of these discs. He's got lots of neat things stored on his belt. He's got a little book diary thing. But if you notice in the detailing, has another stylized M put into it. He's got a little pouch here and a flask for drinking, and very nicely detailed. Now, as for his alternate head here, he's got this little, I don't know what you would call it, helm, or, yeah, I guess you would call it a helm. And if you notice, he's got that stylized M on there as well. Again, very nicely sculpted face and head. I really can't decide which head I like more. This one or the helmless head. But I do really like the belt, and I think I will keep the belt on the figure. And I probably will keep the sword in the sheath there, or on his back. Not really to wield any time, but just to be there and look cool. So there, one problem I do have in the paint. I don't know if this was a paint mistake or if it came out darker than they thought it would, but his hair is a very darker brown than I thought. It's really meant to be red in most of the interpretations. You can even see here on the back of the package here, he's got red hair. And I think in both cartoons he had red hair. I can't recall the vintage figure had red hair or not. And maybe that's why he has brown hair, is because of the vintage figure. I'm gonna have to check that out. Anyway, one other nitpick that I have is, or problem that I have, I really like the color of his fist here. They did a nice job painting it. It's a nice metallic silver. But you can see that, I hope maybe you can see, someone touched the edge of the fist here when the paint was still wet. So I got a fingerprint mark actually in the paint here, which is unfortunate. But that's all really. That's the only flaws that I can figure out. The little fingerprint, maybe the not so red hair, and my most major one is the unusable sword for me. Maybe if they had intended the fist to maybe at least have a hole through it, so you could, take, like some figures do, unpeg the end of it and thread the hilt through and then repeg it. Maybe they could have done that. Maybe they intended to do that, but just didn't have the money to carry it through. So for his articulation, both heads are pretty much the same articulation. They go left and right pretty much. They really go down. His hair is a bit long, so he doesn't look up as much as other figures do. It's kind of unfortunate. His arms do go all the way around, out to the side, rotate at the bicep. This bicep is a little bit bigger, so you may have just a bit more, need a bit more clearance out to the side to turn it around. His elbow does bend, but again, the big fist gets in the way of it folding down, or bending all the way to 90 degrees, like the other arm here. So, you know, a little bit of sacrifice there, not too much. The arm does rotate, or the fist does rotate, and other people have taken this off. I'm not going to, but it's not really pegged in there. It just grips onto the end of the little bracer or gauntlet thing here on the other arm. And there's nothing there, no hand or anything. It would have been neat if they included an extra, like, regular hand that you could switch out, but maybe if you have an extra figure that you don't use, you could do that and have a whole, like, pre-accident Fisto. And his legs go forward and back, out to the side. They rotate at the thigh, bend at the knee, rotate at the boot here, bend forward and back at the ankle very tightly. And he's got the new feet there that hide the ankle pin, which is very neat. And he's got ankle pivot, but again, it's very, very solid here. So, one of the things that I think they've done really well is that a lot of the older characters and figures might have had loose ankles. They've really tightened up those ankles, sometimes making it a little bit harder, but I'd much rather have my figures be able to stand freely instead of flop forward. So, a couple things about Fisto's background here. In the vintage version, I think in the TV show also, he started off as a reformed, not really a villain, but a misguided ally of Skeletor, who then later realized that Skeletor didn't care about what he was doing, or you know, who else got in the way, and thus switched sides and joined the Masters. Now, in the 2002 series, and in the Classics universe, they've made him Man-at-Arms' brother, Malcolm, which is why he has all these stylized M's all over his person, if you saw that earlier in the review. And so, which I think is cool, because they both share a love for facial hair. So, yeah, I like that. And in the 2002 series, if there had been a third season, you would have found out that he was actually the biological father of Tilo. And, you know, they would come out and say it instead of just hint it like they did when he appeared in the series. So, for me, this is a great figure to have. May not be on everybody's list as a must-have, but it is on mine. I hope they do a Jitsu so he can have a showdown with his arch enemy. Or at least, in my mind, they're arch enemies. So I guess that'll be it for Fisto. And until my next review of the March re-release figure of Webstore and the new figure of Cobra Khan, I'll see ya.